So this is Cyndie Morozumi. Cyndie has worked in student affairs in California colleges and universities for 34 years. 27 of them were here at SSU, and the last 20 were in Res Life. Her background includes several fields within student services, including career and academic advising, financial aid, first-year experience in new students, and finally residential life. As a mother of 2 millennial children, Cyndie is fascinated with the millennial generation, our current student population, and attempts to utilize current research and the programs and services offered in the residential community. Cyndie earned her MS in counseling from San Francisco State University and her BS from UC Davis in community education and development. Her outside interests include traveling. Her favorite places are warm weather countries like Mexico, Fiji, and Australia, and enjoys participating in the lives of her 2 adult children, Connor and Kayleen, and her spouse, John. So welcome, Cyndie.
Hey! Woo! Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Whoa, okay. So again, actually I should say welcome and thank you. It's an honor to be here. I don't know how much I'm going to be attached to this or how much I'm going to walk around. I'm not going to, I apologize if I don't make eye contact with everybody. This is an unusual stage. I feel really honored to be back here at University 238 because I have a pretty long history with this class on this campus because, and I'm going to preface this, I'm old. I started teaching the original class. Bruce Peterson, where are you? Yes, he and I taught the original 238 class before it was ever even really a class. And we designed it to give units to the peer mentors who are working with our freshman seminar folks. And it was probably the best class we ever had, huh, Bruce? I mean, there were 12 peer mentors in this class. It was a great class, but it was actually the precursor to what do good leaders need to become better leaders serving our students. We then went on and really developed a full curriculum and course and outcomes over the years. We're dating ourselves now. Bruce is the young one, I'm the old one, but this was back in the mid-90s. So we've had a long history with it. So seeing where it's come and what it does now, the fact that it's a GE class, is just totally exciting for me because we've spent a lot of time on it. I don't know, hopefully as you get into leadership roles, you will find that we do very few things here unintentionally. There's lots of thought and lots of intention and lots of action that goes into everything. And I honestly can say that in this class. If any of you come into my class, into my office, 3rd floor, student center. I'm often bored or lonely at the very end of the hallway. I have the original textbook that we used to teach this class, and we chose a graduate text. We did not realize that at the time. The text that you all use now and the curriculum now is definitely much more geared to what we're trying to accomplish with student leaders. I think back about my college experience because it was just yesterday as well, right? And I think about, wow, I never had an opportunity like this. And what a great opportunity that our student leaders have on this campus, that you all have, that are emerging leaders on our campus. I have said for a long time, including to the president of the university, that I believe Sonoma State, if we were to have a little kind of slogan, is we're the leadership university. I don't know what it is, it's the chicken and the egg, that we have great leaders on this campus. And I don't know if it's because when you all came to campus in one of your 1,000 tours before you decided to come here, that you thought, wow, students can really do a lot of great things on this campus. Or when you got here, you realized, wow, students can do a lot of great things on this campus. So I don't know if we attract people who are already leaders and want to continue, or we just create such a blank slate for people that they see themselves getting involved. At the end of the day, what we have here is an opportunity for students to work at a really, really, really high level and make impact immediately. And I've seen that. I have been on this campus 28 years, and I have witnessed that the entire time. And so I think that it's very cool that you're this next generation of leaders to take over the campus, that we have this opportunity and you have this. I don't think that this stance of being a leadership university is going to change with our current president. She actually likes that phraseology. I used it with her when I first met her. And so I just am very excited to be back here. As you see, you know, my pronouns, she, her, hers. I have many titles. I use boss. I don't consider myself a boss, but I am a manager on campus. I'm a mother, first and foremost. That's probably the most important role that I have, even though my children are grown and adult and live on the East Coast and are fully functioning. I'm still their mom. I think that I'm reminded that when I pay their cell phone bill every month, but that's okay. I'm certainly a spouse. I'm a civil servant. I have been in public education for 36 years, and I'm about to retire. This is my last semester. This is my last formal lecture on this campus. I'm excited about this. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Hopefully you'll clap at the end because you think it was a good lecture. But I consider myself a civil servant. I think about that as I go into retirement, when I've spent every single day of my life serving somebody else. And I'm very okay with that. I would consider servant leadership to be kind of my model. My role has been to serve others, you know. It's been a very fun, God, it's been a great ride, you know, kind of thing. But I do consider myself a civil servant. I serve individuals. I'm also a student advocate, and I hope the students that have worked for me and with me really know that. Our job, my job, is to help students thrive and survive and graduate. My favorite day of the year is commencement. I think the biggest thing is I really do consider myself a professional. I consider myself a teacher, an educator, but most importantly, I consider myself a learner. I learn every single day. I learn from staff. I learn from students. I've never stopped. I've never fooled myself to think that I don't ever learn anymore. And I hope that that comes across both in my message and in how I kind of go through life. So, and I would say we're lifelong learners. I put since 1980 because that's when I graduated from college and started my professional world. But again, I was born in 1957, and I think we really learned a lot since the day we're born. But again, I'd say in my profession I have been a learner and a student and a teacher in some ways since I started this profession in 1980. So, like others, I'm not going to summarize the chapter. I think this chapter is really interesting, and I think this chapter takes a couple of reads. The first one you read just to go, what the heck is it covering? Because there's a lot of content in this chapter, and I'm kind of summarizing it briefly here. But I would invite you to kind of sit back and think about your current roles, the roles that you play now in whatever organization or organizations you played in before you got to Sonoma State, and reflect on what some of the themes of the chapter meant for you. Because I really, really believe that leadership, well, yes, it can be taught. It's an experiential kind of ride. And so thinking about how does that play out for me? When I think about, you know, the whole thing about creating and sustaining ethical communities, environments, how have you done that in your res hall room, you know, in your club activity? There are lots of things that I think we do that we didn't think, oh, I think that's leadership. I think that I've been ethical. I think that I operated with integrity in that area. So I would encourage you to go back and kind of reread this again, because I think you'll find bits and pieces of how it makes sense. I feel like I could easily go all over the board. I'm going to try to be linear in this conversation, but as I thought about both this lecture and I thought about a couple of the things that I'm doing this semester as I do my last lecture series, it kind of all swirls together, which is probably how it should be, you know. But I know that this chapter talks about the skills. It talks about motivations. It talks about, from the relational leadership model, how you have to kind of create an environment that both empowers people to speak up and also to participate, so it's inclusive. So how do we do that from an ethical standpoint, in terms of our leadership style? It talks about moral purpose and moral role modeling, which I'll go over, and then it kind of gives lots of examples about the ethical decision-making models. Those are all in there. Faculty get to test you on that. I'm not really going to go over it as the chapter does. Hopefully what I'm going to share with you is how's that been for me? How have I actualized that? Because that really is, I think, what you're hoping to see is how do you make sense of something that's in a chapter in a book? You know, how does it play out? I think that's why I've invited here, because I have a couple of years of where I've been doing this, you know, and so I'm going to get my best stab at it. But again, I really do encourage you to go back and maybe spend a couple of times reading this chapter to see, because at the end of the day, while we want you to get a B in this class, you know, while we want you to do well, we want you to be able to kind of take this information and make meaning for it as you navigate through your leadership roles, whether now, next year, even when you graduate. So, and again, I think there's a lot that this chapter can share with you on that. So, you know, I had the opportunity a few weeks ago of being interviewed by a senior business class. They wanted to talk with a senior leader on campus, and they chose me. I guess that was really kind of sweet, but I never see myself as that. But they asked me some questions, and they asked me things like, you know, what my definition of leadership was. They asked me, what's most important in a leadership role? Is it having a mission statement? Is it having core values? You know, is it having a vision? You know, they asked me, you know, are leaders born or can they be taught? You know, things like, you know, what is a typical journey of a leader? And then they asked, do you make mistakes as a leader? You know, and so I thought about that as I also thought about this class. And I did ask the question to myself, you know, can leaders, you know, be born? You know, can leaders, you know, are they something that are we born from birth, or can we be skilled in that? And I do think that we can be learned leaders. But I started to look up, what is my definition of leadership? And I started rambling all kinds of things. And so I went to the dictionary, right, because that's what we do. And interestingly enough, you know, it's a guiding or directing head, or as an army, movement, or political group. Leadership is an act or instance of leading, guiding, direction. And then integrity is the adherence to moral and ethical principles, soundness of moral character, and honesty. And I realized that the definitions of leader and leadership didn't even have integrity in there, in the word. You know, and yet we talk about leading with integrity, you know, so how does my leadership, what is my leadership definition? So for me, leadership is acting, directing, guiding from a moral place, purpose, compass, ethically and value-driven, and not necessarily connected to power. Because I think that's also one of the other things that this chapter talks about, you know, effective versus ethical leaders. You know, you can be very, very effective and do wrong things, right? They talk about Enron and some of the, there's lots of examples, unfortunately, every day, about maybe powerful leadership that may not be positive leadership. So I think for me, it's not tied to power. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, and women tend to lead very differently than men. I often don't think of myself as a powerful person. I understand that there's a lot of privilege that comes with my title on campus, and I can walk into rooms and I can ask for certain things to happen. But I've never really felt myself as powerful. So that's not a word that I would probably ever use, you know, in conversations about leadership, because I don't think that those two are necessarily tied together. I do think that good leaders exert power. You know, hopefully they transform more than show power. But again, I can see that. So that's kind of, you know, lots of good questions. I hope that both this class and maybe this lecture, or as you move through this journey, more questions are asked than answered, because I think that's really kind of what it's all about. So in looking at this, I looked at, okay, if I'm an ethical participant in this leadership, you know, what's my story? You know, are we born with it? Can we be trained? I'm sure that there are a lot of people that now live in France that are very fluent in French, that were not born in France, that can exhibit, you know, good work performance. So they learned how to work. So I think that we can amass skills. I think we can learn some new skills. I think we also probably have just some maybe tendencies, either in our personality or in our characteristics, that lend to this a little bit more. So I look at my life, and I look at how did I become where I became, because I think that's good for us to know. How do any of us become what we become? What is it in and about our upbringing? Because if you look at my upbringing, that cute little girl there, and I was probably 4 or 5, maybe 4. It was Easter Sunday in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I look like, and those are my brothers and sisters, I look like I come from a pretty normal, you know, middle-class white family. And that is so far from my reality. I look at my wedding picture, I was young, 1978, I got married, and I look at my life in between those two, from being a little kid, running in the grass, to my adult life. And I've come to find that my life is probably not very normal. I don't know that it's typical. My father was probably the most prejudiced man on the planet. Maybe there are probably a few people more prejudiced than him, but he didn't like the man I chose to marry. In fact, he disowned me when I got engaged because I married a Japanese American. I got engaged to a Japanese American. Again, my husband was born in the United States. He was born in Stockton, California. You know, his parents were born in the United States, but they were the victims of Executive Order 9066. So you all probably have learned about Executive Order 9066, correct? I never learned about it in high school. They didn't teach us about the Japanese internment when I was in high school. It was not something that was mandated to be taught. Fortunately, it is mandated now. So my nice little normalish looking upbringing and my high school where I get involved with an Asian American, and then when that man asks me to marry him and I say yes, and my father disowns me, I think, wow, there's a lot there. And he said he could not come to my wedding for ethical reasons. He said he didn't believe in interracial marriage. That's what they called it back then. He didn't believe in that, and he said he would be a hypocrite if he went. And I'm like, well, it's your choice there, you know, kind of thing. It was his doing. And so I had a very lovely wedding. Interesting enough, he paid for it. But he's not present in that picture. And he knows he missed out on that. He came around later, but he realized that he missed out on something. Still was a very prejudiced man for the rest of his life. But that was part of my background. Is I already was dealing with social justice issues long before there was ever even a conversation, you know. And I think about our background and kind of what it means to us, and how did I become who I am, and how does that help where I go with it? Because I chose my major in college to be community education and development. Long before I ever thought I was going to go into student affairs, because if you talk to any of us old timers, we didn't really know we were going to go into the field we went into. We kind of fell into it and realized, wow, I'm not leaving this place. This is too good a gig, you know, kind of thing. But back then, my education at UC Davis was all about how do I empower. Again, it was a word back in the 80s that was not popular. Other people to find a voice for that. So there was something already either involved in me or because of my experience that was important to share in the world. So I think about, I call these defining moments, how did I take what was my background and what do I do with that as I begin to kind of journey through the world? Those are my beautiful, beautiful children. And I think that, I mentioned this to another group that I talked with earlier this semester about defining moments. You know, defining moments for me are things that have major impact that we have reflected on and that are value driven. It's like, what have I done, or what do I do as a parent as I bring up people? Now I have biracial children, right? I have into the world. What are my defining moments kind of with them? And I think about what their life has been like, and where did I have an impact with them. So these two very adult children are very much themselves engaged in very socially justice-oriented careers and their own position, their personal position on it. But they looked at, and how I know what kind of is the core of them, and you'll get an opportunity, maybe you did this, maybe when you were writing your personal essays for college, you asked your parents to read them. So I learned a lot as I reviewed their personal statements. They're 4 years apart. They didn't check it out with each other, but both of them wrote very much about the juxtapositions that they felt from looking at their grandparents, both sets of grandparents. because they knew themselves that they were biracial, because they told me every time they took a STAR test, what box am I supposed to check, Mom? I don't see the box for me, so that I knew that was going on for them. They understood that my father was extremely prejudiced. They looked at the wedding albums. They knew that he wasn't there. They asked why, kind of thing. They knew that their grandparents on their dad's side spent time in a concentration camp. Camp is an interesting word. We're not allowed to use that in our household, because there was absolutely nothing campish about what those internment places were. They were prisons, right? When you have barbed wire and people with guns, they're prisons, right? So they knew that was going on, and so they had this, kind of balance of both things. And then they look at their parents, and there was a defining moment when Connor is the oldest. He's 29. And Kayleen, who's 25. Kayleen was probably, 6 or 7, 8. I don't know, when do you begin to understand what jokes are? Well, they came home one day and they were telling jokes at the dinner table. And the joke was about the dumb blondes. How many dumb blondes does it take to turn a light bulb? And I stopped them, I looked at them and I said, excuse me. At the time my hair was really blonde then, and we had a conversation about interrupting prejudice. And that is exactly the words that I used to them. Say, why we don't tell those kind of jokes, why those are not okay. When I was a kid, it was dumb Pollock jokes, we've always thought that we needed to belittle somebody else in our jokes. They got that, so they had that. So we've had conversations over the time about, and I would call that a defining moment about prejudice. So when I read their college essays, they both talked at length about kind of what was important to them. And I talk about why this is a defining moment. It's because when my set of values become their set of values, and their set of values are really around very much social justice. So Connor's in a PhD program, is going to be an ecologist one day, maybe at Sonoma State University. And one of his major missions is to extend underrepresented minorities in the sciences. And that's what he does now in Atlanta. He gets involved in schools to try to help promote that. Kayleen just finished with her master's in public health, and she works exclusively with the LGBT community, almost exclusively with the trans community in terms of better enabling. And again, given all the things that we're seeing with some of the executive orders, she's got a mess to clean up in a couple of years. So again, very much they are interested in promoting a more just and accessible world to people. And I asked them this Christmas, they were home for the holidays, how did you come to be? Because I'm an incredibly proud mom. And they said, well, it was because of what you guys do. My husband is a bigger feminist than I am. And so, again, they really saw, so when we talk about moral role modeling, I think it has a place for it. Because they not only saw it just in the verbiage, but they saw it in action. And they saw it coming to campus here. They saw it in the kinds of workshops we put on and the speakers we're bringing. So I think that was important for me when I think about my leadership role. I'm as much a learner from these two as I am a teacher. And now I really am a learner because they're really way smarter than me and much more contemporary than me. But we have these great conversations now about advancing good, ethical world. And that's what it is. It's not about the classroom and it's not about leadership. It's about a good, ethical world. So I feel like that, because I can't separate, much as like my title said, what I do at home and what I do here. It all is swirled together. Either you believe it or you don't believe it, kind of thing. So when I think about kind of how does one become an ethical participant? Or how does one become ethical in their participation of life? And I think of a couple of areas. Some of these match the contents of the chapter, and some of them don't in ways. But I'm going to go over a little bit about kind of values, because I think they're important. What is that thing called the moral compass? I talk about it a lot. Moral courage, what we need to have there. That whole moral talk. I love that section of the chapter on moral talk and dialogue leadership. And there's some both excellent examples on this campus of where we exhibited that, and there's some people still in this room that had a role in that. So there's that. The whole idea of ethical fitness, cultural tolerance, and then ethical versus effective leadership. So when I think about values, I've always said that we operate in residential life from a value-driven kind of model. Those are our values. Your parents, if they came to orientation, they saw these because I show them to the parents during orientation. We talk about them. We write our job descriptions for our staff around them. We do our evaluations around them. We decide how we're going to spend our money. That is a value-driven environment when we really care about community. So much so that we talk a lot about how we define community and how we develop community in our res halls. Hopefully, if you've lived in our halls, you've experienced that. As leaders in our halls, you will help create that kind of thing. So definitely, that's an idea when we talk about coming from a value. What is my purpose? When the students in that business class asked me, what's more important, vision, core values, or mission statement, I said core values. Because to me, that's where things should stem from. A vision is great. That's where you want to go. Ooh, big, audacious goals, right? Where can you take it? And a mission kind of helps guide to some ways. It's that 17 words or less. What do you do? But it's where your values, what at your core, what is important to you. And I can say that we spend our money, we hire, we train, we select, we promote, based on those values. And I firmly do believe that. And I did not write these. The staff wrote them about 10 years ago. We chose to look at what matters to us in what's going to matter to our students. So to me, that's an example of value-driven. When I think about moral courage, it's the courage in self is strength, right? That you can persevere, that you can stand up to something. I have courage, I'm strong. When I think about moral courage, sometimes you take a hard line on something because you know it's the right thing to do, even though you know other people are going to disagree with you. So I use this example. My mother had breast cancer a few years ago, and before she actually had it, I've walked the Susan Komen walks. That's 39 miles in 2 days, and I've walked the Susan Komen, the 60 miles. I've done that 4 times. So I've put a lot of miles on my feet. And I say, a blister you can get over in a couple weeks. Breast cancer, you get it for life, So the whole idea is, and this was taken from A League of Their Own, it's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard, that's what makes it great. And I really think that about leadership, that it's not easy. Some of the hardest decisions, the biggest decisions we make are hard. And I tell staff this all the time. If that decision gets easy, we should get out of the game. Because it means we're not paying enough attention to it. They're supposed to be hard. No one said this was supposed to be easy. If we thought it was going to be, that doesn't mean that it doesn't come easy to us, or we have talents, or we really enjoy it. But no one said it's going to be easy. Sometimes those moral decisions are really easy because it's just right and wrong. But sometimes they're tricky. There's complexities to it, and that's what some of the moral dialogue gets into. So I think that having courage and having moral courage to take a position and stand by it, sometimes you're lone man out, so the idea of finding your allies, because sometimes it's going to be you as the president of your organization or you as a CSA, and you have to go and you have to have a difficult conversation, with your friends. I mean, the tricky thing about student leadership is who you're leading and who you're guiding are your peers. And that's tricky waters, right? So when I think about that moral courage, yes, can I walk 60 miles because it's going to advance research for something? You bet. In a heartbeat I will do that. I did it 5 times. Do I feel crap at the end of the day? Yes. Walking 26 miles at 10,000 elevation in 90-degree heat sucks. It really, really did. But it pales in comparison to someone who's going through radiation or chemo or something else, I think that's just, to me, symbolic of the kinds of kind of moral stamina that we need to make some of these big, big, big decisions. And you will face them, and they won't be easy. But again, I'm going to submit, they weren't supposed to be easy. And when they get easy, we should be thinking about getting out of the game, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Okay, you guys are really quiet. Maybe I don't have enough jokes. Cultural tolerance was another thing, and that actually is from the text, but I think about it a little differently. That's our diversity statement in residential life. And again, I'm going to pull from something that I've spent the last 20 years in. We have had a diversity statement in residential life since the late 80s. We're probably one of the first universities to have a diversity statement. I know we were the first university in our kind of our Procure region. And we firmly believe, that our goal, when I think about religious tolerance, it's the characteristics, and in fact, even in the book, when they talk about the cultural, how do you tolerate, is being flexible, being non-judgmental, right? Being not only a really good listener, but a really good observer. What are you picking up here? These decisions are going to be complex, so assuming out the gate that there's going to be complexity there, understanding that we need to check our personal biases, certainly showing respect and showing empathy. I know that you had Karina Busso last week with you, and I witnessed something from her, and I think she's a great example of somebody who shows moral tolerance day to day, because she's got some pretty strong convictions about things. But more important for her is making sure that the conversation can happen. There's got to be a way for us to hear the other side. So when my son went off to college, he went to a school that actually did roommate matching. This is why we don't do roommate matching, because his roommate could not have been further from him. Here, roommate, way over here. So you walk into Connor's room, he went to Santa Cruz, Bob Marley poster, peace flags. His whole side of the room was a riot of color. I gave him a little scrapbook before he left. He took out all the pictures and put them up on the wall. A riot of color, riot of color. His roommate, one picture on the wall, nice, neat bed, kind of thing. Very different. Again, you've heard my background. You've heard our background. His roommates, parents, his dad was a truck driver. They were incredibly, incredibly religious. We didn't raise our children with any kind of religion, although my husband and I are both, I call us recovering Catholics. We did K-12 Catholic school. So very different people. One night they were having a conversation about, I think, sexual orientation. And Connor got a little kind of frustrated because he couldn't convince his roommate that his opinion was the correct opinion. And I said, well, and it was the first time that we had this really in-depth discussion about being liberal doesn't mean you're tolerant, and being tolerant doesn't mean you're being liberal. Tolerance means you can hear the other side. You don't have to accept it, but you can hear the other side. And I said, there's a reason why you're living with that person. There's a reason on this planet why you're living with somebody very different. Because at the end of the day, what those two had in common was that their house was their sanctuary, and they could come back and it was always safe. Did they get along? Yes. Okay. Did they go to parties together? Do they have a relationship? No. But they knew that that was a safe place for them. That's what I say, that's the goal of all living arrangements, right? That you can always be safe when you come back to that place. But they were very different, and that understanding that being culturally tolerant means that I can have a position, but more importantly, how can I hear your position? So we challenge students, and some of you may have been those challenged ones this during the election time when we saw things in windows, because students put things in windows that rather than saying that they really hated Trump, they used that, right, with the F word, we encourage them to not say that because that's very judgmental. But maybe you might want to articulate things about that candidate that you disagree with. And we did the same thing for the other side. Because we saw all different signs in the halls. So we talked about how can you, because at the end of the day, what we want is the conversation, right? This is what's vacant right now is we don't have the conversation about what is it about why you believe what you believe. Because if I'm culturally tolerant, I should at least hear it. I don't have to agree with it. I don't even have to accept it. I don't even have to like it. I can really hate it. But I should be able to hear it, right? And especially as a leader, your position is not the position. Your view is not the view. Your take on it is not the take on it, right? It is a take. So understanding cultural tolerance, and if you want to really see someone in action, go in and talk to Karina about this, because she does a beautiful job of how do we encourage that. You know, I think that all of these peaceful protests are encouraging, listen to my side, let me hear your side, kind of thing. That's what that should be the goal there of that. So I feel like that whole thing is very much embodied in our diversity statement at Sonoma State. And again, we try very hard when we're out recruiting candidates. We talk about it in there, in our training, in our selection of staff. We're looking for that, you know, because at the end of the day, what we want is the good conversation, right? And I think that is sometimes hard. There's a really good book by Maura Cullen, who's a diversity trainer in the country, and it says the 35 things well-intended people say that are wrong. You know, excellent book. We brought her to campus last year. Again, I think we try to be politically correct. We try to be all things. Again, being liberal doesn't mean we're right, and that doesn't mean that that's the best position. It's our position. So hopefully that makes sense. Moral talk and moral leadership. I think that this part of the chapter, if you take nothing home but this, it's a winner. Because being a leader with integrity means that you are willing to engage in those conversations. You're willing to encourage those conversations. You're willing to have them. Because you also role model integrity when you do have those good conversations. I think about, you know, and I don't have the date because it's just September 22nd. It doesn't have a date on it. It was 3 or 4 years ago now. We had a hate incident. And again, you know, I don't mean to be offensive by using that poster with the word still written on it. But that's what went out by our student leaders on Facebook. Because somebody in the SSU community felt like it was okay to write that. And a group of other SSU community members, students, said, that's not okay. The significance of why we have the Seawolf commitment today was because that incident, which totally offended a large group of students on this campus, said, that does not represent us. But they didn't just say that, and they didn't say administration fix this. They said, we need to own this. So they had a town hall meeting. There must have been 300 people in that town hall meeting. There may be some of you who are here that were at that town hall meeting, where they challenged each other. First, they had to hear each other. So they exercised that, tell me your story. So people became very vulnerable, and they told their story of discrimination, of what they experienced or what their friends experienced on this campus. And believe me, as a predominantly white institution, there were some stories that our predominantly white students and staff had not heard before because it didn't happen to us. So there was a level of vulnerability that happened that day. But the beautiful thing that happened that day is they said, well, that's not me. That's not what I want a Seawolf to be. That's not what I want our legacy to be. So they challenged themselves. The students challenged each other to say, then what is a Seawolf? And that's what led to the conversation about what does a Seawolf mean. That's what led to these 4 words up here. That's what led to all the conversation about what does it mean to be a Seawolf, because that was not what a Seawolf is. So the alternative was, then what is it? And now we have a positive place to go. That whole conversation role modeled beautifully and very skillfully by some of our incredible student leaders what it means to dialogue, not to accuse, not to get defensive, but to dialogue about what does it mean to have a conversation, because we needed to hear that. And I still go back to that night because it was so, so powerful, because the students declared something. And to this day, I think you still declare some of this. I think people buy this. These are not just 4 words on a wall or 4 words on a backpack or 4 words, you know, on our digital media. Hey, hopefully they mean something to you, because those students said, we need to stand up, speak up, and act up. And they did. To me, that is probably one of the best examples of really trying to tackle that whole idea of moral kind of dialogue, or the leadership dialogue, but moral talk. And it's not just, it really is walking the talk, and we talk about that a lot. And again, I think that's I continue to show this because I think it's important not to lose that as our history, because it was a pretty defining moment, and I also think it was a sea change for our world, and I think other people would probably agree with you on that. So when I think about ethical fitness, I can stand and do anything. So that's Branch Rickey, and that's Jackie Robinson, right? You all know the story about that. I have the esteemed honor of knowing Branch Rickey's granddaughter. She's a personal friend of mine. And long before the movie came out, and long before, she told stories about why did Branch Rickey do what he did, and what was important about that. When he was a young coach, he used to take he had African American players on his team, and the hotels wouldn't let them stay in the rooms. So he always he let them stay in his room. And one day he remembers, and I think they actually used this in the movie, but he sat there, and this young junior college guy was wringing his hands, and Branch said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And he said, "I wish I could wipe the color off of me. I wish I could," because he wanted to be accepted, And at that point, and my friend tells me that was the defining moment for Branch Rickey, when he decided he's got to change this. It took many years because it took a strategy. First, he had to become an owner of a team. And he did become an owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And then he had to understand that he had to take on all the other owners who were white, who didn't really want to see it. So he talked, and when he talked to Jackie about this, what he really said, he said, "We've got no army, there's virtually nobody on our side." And that was very, very true. No owners, no umpires, very few newspapermen would be there. And I'm afraid that the fans could be hostile, and they were hostile, but we're in a tough position. And then the key is we can win if we only convince the world that I'm doing this because you're a great ball player, you're a great gentleman. To me, that is moral fitness. It's understanding that I'm going to take a lot of beating for this, but I'm strong because ethically we're doing the right thing. And he did. There's this whole expose at the African American Museum of Culture, History and Culture in DC, and they talk about this. And some people weren't happy. Actually, some people in the African American community weren't necessarily happy, because basically when they opened up the National Baseball League to African Americans, it unfortunately undercut and dissolved the Negro League that was out there at the time. And some people say that Branch Rickey was just opportunistic, that he was a good businessman, and he was just doing this for business. And I think that gets portrayed out there. I can tell you that that's not what he expressed to his family close home, that he knew that he had a moral obligation and a way, because he was from the privileged set, to change that. To me, that's ethical fitness. It's being able to take something and stand by it and challenge it and be strong, because when you take a stand, you're going to get lots of things thrown at you. And he said, as long as I keep, I am ethically fit, because this comes from the right place to do that. So I love Wardles, but that is the Seawolf Commitment and our diversity statement, all thrown into the same thing. And what I love is that Seawolf pops out. What I actually love is, because this is kind of summarizing a little bit about what all of this means, because it isn't just a bunch of words on a paper, but it's the important words. I love that respect, engaging behavior, community are the top, because that is what we do. We are engaging people. Hopefully we have respect first and foremost. The bottom one was, selection, self-expression, and celebrate relationships. Because again, there's that happy part about it too. It's really celebrating where we are coming from. Finally, in summary, when I think about this, I think about quotes, and I think Warren Buffett probably says it kind of well when he says, in looking for people to hire, you look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. If they don't have the first, the other two will kill you, right? So the idea of, ethical leadership, effective leadership, toxic leadership versus not kind of thing, And again, I think, and then Dwight Eisenhower said, the supreme quality of leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on the selecting section gang, a football field, an army, or in the office. Again, I hope that what you've gained from this is, to me, integrity is something that's deep inside. And it's how we play it out in all of those attributes that are important. You are at the beginning of maybe some incredibly defining moments. I hope that you take the time as you go through this to reflect, look at the ripple effects. Our actions create ripples. Some of those ripples are really good ripples. Some of those ripples were like, whoa, you know. So thinking about where your place is and how you move through and what ripples and what defining moments you're going to create for yourself. And again, I know that some people have to leave, so I want to thank you. And if you have to leave, and some of you have, otherwise I guess I'm sticking around for questions. But thank you very much for letting me chat at you.